Thank you, sir. God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, and yet I still struggle to take the hint. I don't know why it is this year particularly, but I've been very focused on the practice of silence during my Advent period of reflection. I'm thinking that less may be more, less activity, less talk, and more quiet stillness. I'm trying to listen more to that Christmas story. I'm trying to hear what it is that God is trying to say to me. Not so much, Chuck, in the mighty wind or the earthquake or the raging fire, but in that still small voice. I try to imagine what it would be like if I was there beside Mary when the angels came and talked to her, when they proclaimed good news to her. And then I try to imagine what it would be like if I was good news to someone else. I imagine myself walking along with the shepherds as they made their way to Bethlehem. And I wanted to listen to that conversation as they talked among themselves about that miracle that they were about to encounter. And then I wondered, I wonder what miracle I might be to somebody else today. I try to imagine listening to the Magi as they ponder all the questions of science and what it would be to stand in awe of all that God has created for us. But to do this, you see, I'd have to listen a whole lot more and talk a whole lot less. And this is a very difficult thing for a minister to do. But I'm trying. I'm trying this year. We don't do silence very well, do we, Jack? We get uncomfortable and we try to fill the void with words and constant action. We've forgotten that lost art of silence and the benefits it brings. I don't know about you, but I can hardly go to a restaurant anymore where there's not at least 1, if not 10 TVs blaring at me. I can't have a conversation with whoever's across the table. You ever tried to pump gas into your car? They got these monitors on the gas pump, the audio-visual things screaming at me. If I would just walk inside the store, I could get a hot dog and what we call in Wisconsin a soda for 79 cents. I don't want a hot dog or a soda. I just want to pump my gas, get in my car, and leave in silence. Am I the only one? Am I the only one? It's a rare moment, you see, when we're still and listening for that voice of God. Surprising things can happen in the silence. Like on that one night, it was Christmas Eve in Oberndorf, Austria. Barbara knows this story. The priest had prepared everything for the Christmas Eve service, everything from message to music. He was all set. And he went out into the sanctuary. He's just arranging things and getting the bulletins just right, making sure everything's clean. And then he discovered something that was awful. The organ wouldn't play. So he got back into the organ. He starts checking the keys and the pedals and the stops. He got behind the console and he's looking around trying to figure out why this thing doesn't play. And there was nothing he could do to solve the problem. And then he remembered, well, I guess what I should do is just stop. I should just stop. I should pause and pray. And so that's what he did, John. And he remembered a Christmas poem that he had written a couple of years earlier. A poem that he had shared with some of his friends. But he'd never come up with the melody to go along with it. He dug it out from his desk, he shoved it into his coat, and he rushed out into the night, heading off to the church organists. The church organists are always like the heroes of these stories. He rushed over to the church organist's house, and Franz Gruber, the organist, came to the door and he said, "What's wrong?" He said, "The organ won't play. Can you set this poem to music and teach it to the choir so that in a couple of hours they could present it to their congregation for Christmas Eve?" While the organist said, "There's not a snowball's chance, and I'll see what I can do." He said, "I'll see what I can do." And Franz Gruber went back to his study, he pulled out his guitar, and he started to set this poem to music. And that night, Joseph Moore, the priest, and Franz Gruber, the heroic church organist, stood at the altar and they introduced this simple little song to the congregation. You may have heard of it. It was called Silent Night, Holy Night. Wonderful things can happen in silence. But we have to be still. Remember, he stopped, he paused, he prayed. We have to stop. Get that commotion and activity out at some distance from us. And then maybe we can hear the message in this. We all keep thinking God's going to come to us in some Charlton Heston spectacular way with mighty winds and earthquakes and raging infernos. I think God comes to us most often less in the spectacular and more in that stillness. And if we will just take the hint, remember, 2 ears, 1 mouth, we might just learn something this year. That's what was going on with Elijah. He couldn't hear God when God came by in the earthquake. He couldn't hear him when he came by with the mighty wind. He couldn't hear him in the raging fire. But sure enough, maybe you've been in a cave yourself. It's a trick question, guys. All of us have been in a cave. And when we're in that cave, maybe we ought not to look for the spectacular. Maybe we just be still and listen. I wanted to read you that story from Elijah, but I haven't forgotten about the Christmas story. I like that story and that stillness because I think maybe that's why God chose shepherds. Think of it if you're a shepherd. By the way, I have discovered 4, no less than 4, members of our congregation who have raised sheep. I came this morning to the 8:15 service knowing 2, and there were 2 that confessed, in the early service that they had raised sheep as well. I'm not going to tell you their names. I thought maybe after church you go out and greet people and say, did you raise sheep? Did you raise sheep? We'll be known as the church of the sheep. But sure enough, I think maybe there's something about shepherds because they're always listening carefully in case there were predators out there to harm the sheep. They were attentive to the risks and challenges of the night. And so when the angels came and declared good tidings of great joy, they were already prepared to receive the good news. They understood the paradox that this minister, this lowly, beloved interim minister, struggles to get, and that's the paradox of speaking less and listening more, and thereby having a spiritual chance of hearing God. Okay, if I tell you one more story. There was a church organist and a pastor. And this church organist had promised the Sunday school kids a new song for Christmas. But as time went by and the candles were lit, one around the Advent wreath, all four were lit and the song had still not been written. It was past midnight on Christmas Eve. Still no song. And as the organist says, he was fast asleep when an angel whispered into his ear. And he awoke, got himself out of bed, and jotted down this song. And he was able to deliver the next morning on Christmas Day this song to the kids of Sunday school. It's a song we're going to close with in a moment. You've heard of it. It's entitled, O Little Town of Bethlehem. And I think it captures things well because it talks about the hopes and fears of all the years. And I'm so aware that that's us. That's all of us. Don't we all live somewhere, Pat, between our hopes and our fears? Isn't that life? And in the midst of that, humanity, that humanness, that's where God meets us. Now, I know what you're thinking. You say, oh, Jim, you're making too much out of the story. That guy was just a procrastinator. And maybe he was. But on the other hand, maybe he was waiting for just the right moment, a silent moment when this peaceful Christmas carol could be born. So I'll cut to the chase. Here's what I came to tell you. That during Christmas time, when there's so much activity and commotion, I'm not going to be one of those ministers stand up here and say, now don't get caught up in the rush of things. I'm way past that. I know it's what we're going to do. So go ahead and do it. But do yourself a favor. Don't forget this element of silence. The kind of silence that calls to all of us in our caves to remember as it was on the night when Jesus was born. That there's just something about the stillness that is so necessary to our souls. And it's in the sound of sheer silence that God calls to us. And He has a message for us. A message so profound and personal and meaningful that it could only be captured in the cry of a newborn baby. And it's that God is here with us. Right here with us. Emmanuel. May God bless you. And may God bless our dear United Church of Marco Island.